The document she slid across my kitchen table that Tuesday morning wasn't a birthday card. It was a petition for legal guardianship. My own son stood behind her, eyes downcast, as Caroline explained in that honeyed voice reserved for nursing homes that it was for my own protection. "The doctors agree, Thomas," she said, tapping a medical assessment I'd never authorized. "These memory lapses aren't normal aging. Remember last week when you couldn't find your car keys? What she conveniently omitted was that she'd moved those keys herself, just as she'd rearranged my medicine cabinet, hidden my reading glasses, and changed the passwords to my online banking, all while documenting my resulting confusion. 50 years building Harrison Construction from nothing, surviving 3 recessions and a heart attack, only to sit at my own walnut table, the first piece of furniture Margaret and I had saved for, watching my daughter-in-law's French manicured finger pointing to where I should sign away my life. "I'd like to read it first," I said, pulling the document closer. Caroline exchanged a look with Robert. "Of course, Dad," she said, that slight emphasis on Dad that always sounded false coming from her lips. "But remember, your neurologist said—" "Dr. Winters is not my neurologist," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. "He's your tennis partner's brother, who I met once for 15 minutes. Robert finally spoke, his voice laced with the guilt Caroline had cultivated. "Dad, we found your checkbook in the freezer. You've been paying the same bills twice. Yesterday you called Mom's name, and she's been gone 8 months. I didn't tell them I put the checkbook there deliberately after overhearing Caroline on the phone with their creditor. Didn't mention that I sometimes called out to Margaret just to remind myself of the sound of her name in our suddenly too quiet home. Instead, I set the papers down. I need time to consider this." "Of course," Caroline smiled too quickly. "We only want what's best. Speaking of which, I've scheduled a walkthrough with a realtor tomorrow just to explore options. This place is too much for you now." The house Margaret and I had restored plank by plank, where we'd raised Robert, where I'd carried her across the threshold 49 years ago. That night, alone in my study, I stared at the Brunswick Trust account statements Caroline didn't know existed. Margaret had been right to insist on financial contingencies, just in case. My wife of nearly 5 decades had seen something in Caroline's eyes that I'd chosen to ignore for Robert's sake. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "James Levinson's office," answered a crisp voice. "This is Thomas Harrison. I need to speak with James about changing my will immediately." For the first time since Margaret's funeral, I felt the fog of grief lifting, replaced by crystal clarity. Caroline wanted a senile old man. I'd give her one. And while she collected her evidence of my decline, I'd be collecting mine. "Peço desculpas pelo mal-entendido. Vou reescrever o capítulo 2, primeira etapa, com maior profundidade emocional e narrativa, conforme solicitado." Primeira etapa, capítulo 2, James Levinson's corner office hadn't changed in 20 years. The same leather chairs, the same view of downtown, the same strategic chess set where I'd once taught him the Sicilian defense while negotiating his first commercial lease. He listened without interrupting as I laid out Caroline's machinations, only his whitening knuckles betraying his anger. "So, she's gaslighting you," he said finally, using a term I'd never heard. When he explained it, systematically manipulating someone into questioning their own sanity, the pieces locked into place with terrible clarity. The medications being rearranged, the keys moving overnight, the thermostat constantly changing. It was deliberate, I said, the realization like ice water in my veins. I thought I was losing my mind from grief. "Thomas, I knew Margaret for 30 years. She didn't marry a fool." James opened his laptop. "Let's build your counteroffensive. First, we document everything. Second, we create a financial fortress. Third, and this is crucial, we reach Robert." The next morning, I initiated what James called strategic vulnerability. I deliberately left my checkbook visible with several math errors, which Caroline photographed when she thought I wasn't watching. When she suggested consolidating my accounts for simplicity, I appeared reluctant, then gradually yielded. I suppose I haven't been as sharp lately, I conceded, watching the triumph flash behind her eyes as she helped me complete transfer forms for my primary accounts. What she didn't know, I'd already transferred substantial assets into irrevocable trusts under James's management. What remained visible was merely the stage set for her performance. The digital recorder James provided, disguised as a harmless paperweight, captured Caroline's true intentions that very evening. "His primary physician is still hesitant," she told someone while I pretended to doze in my study. "Says he seems oriented during office visits, but I've found another doctor. More expensive but discreet. He understands estate situations like ours." I nearly revealed myself then, almost confronted her with the naked greed in her voice. But James's warning echoed, "The moment they know you're fighting back, you lose your advantage. Let them believe they're winning until it's too late." So I watched silently as Caroline and Robert withdrew $50,000, ostensibly for home healthcare preparations, actually to pay off their third mortgage. I documented as she inventoried my late wife's jewelry, making notes on values. I photographed her meeting with a realtor in my driveway while I was supposedly napping. The deepest wound, however, was Robert. My son, who once embodied integrity, now avoided my gaze during Caroline's manipulations. The boy who'd refused to cheat even in board games now stood silently as his wife forged my signature on documents. One evening, finding a rare moment alone with him in the garage where I'd taught him to build his first birdhouse, I sought the son behind the stranger. "Your mother would have turned 68 next month," I said softly, running my hand along her gardening bench. Robert's shoulders stiffened. "Dad, try not to dwell on—" "I thought we might plant those blue hydrangeas she always wanted, by the eastern wall." I met his eyes directly, letting my usual confusion fall away. "She'd have appreciated that, don't you think?" For a flickering moment, I glimpsed recognition in his eyes, not of my words, but of me, the father he knew. But headlights swept across the driveway as Caroline returned, and the connection severed as quickly as it had formed. That night, I made a devastating discovery while reviewing my home security footage, another precaution James had insisted upon. Caroline wasn't just manipulating financial documents, she was gradually replacing my medications with lookalikes. A quick internet search confirmed my suspicion. The blue tablets weren't my prescribed blood pressure medication, but over-the-counter sleep aids, explaining my recent afternoon drowsiness. The yellow capsules weren't my cholesterol medication, but antihistamines that cause confusion in elderly patients. She wasn't just waiting for my mental decline, she was engineering it. The revelation should have terrified me. Instead, it brought a strange, cold clarity, the same feeling I'd experienced during the construction collapse of '89, when 3 support beams failed simultaneously. In crisis, perception sharpens. Time slows, solutions emerge. I called James at midnight. "We accelerate," I said simply. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Once we execute this phase—" "She's drugging me, James, while my son watches." The line went silent for a moment. "Then I'll file the papers tomorrow. But Thomas, reaching Robert is still paramount. Without him, this becomes scorched earth." After hanging up, I stood at my bedroom window, gazing at the oak tree Robert and I had planted when he was 7. Now massive and strong, its roots had cracked the garden pathway, a fitting metaphor for how Caroline's influence had fractured our foundation. Tomorrow, I would begin building a bridge back to my son, and a wall between him and the woman who was poisoning us both. Tem toda razão. Vou reescrever o capítulo 3, segunda etapa, seguindo estritamente as instruções para evitar inícios genéricos, criar um loop adequado com o final do capítulo anterior e garantir a continuidade sem repetições ou redundâncias. Segunda etapa, capítulo 3. The midnight call to James still echoed in my mind as I watched Caroline prepare my morning medications at the kitchen counter. Through the window behind her, dead leaves from the maple tree spiraled down like nature's timekeepers. Each falling leaf marked another day closer to her planned takeover and to my counter-offensive. "Here you go, Dad," Robert said, sliding the pill organizer toward me while avoiding my eyes. The same hands that once built model airplanes with meticulous care now participated in what amounted to poisoning. I pretended to swallow the tablets, tucking them instead beneath my tongue until I could dispose of them in the bathroom. The clarity that came from eliminating her sedatives from my system was both blessing and curse. My mind sharpened, but with it came the full, undiluted pain of betrayal. The false pills revealed a truth more bitter than any medicine. Caroline wasn't merely opportunistic, she was methodical, dangerous. "I'm thinking we should visit Dr. Garrett tomorrow instead of Thursday," she announced, scrolling through her phone. "He had a cancellation." "Whatever you think best," I mumbled, slumping slightly in my chair, giving her the docile confusion she expected while calculating my next move. That afternoon, while Caroline was at her volunteer work, actually meeting with a real estate appraiser according to my security footage, I examined my study for surveillance devices. James had warned that someone tampering with medication might go further. Behind my desk lamp, I discovered a tiny camera disguised as a screw. The violation of this final private space hardened my resolve. I left it intact, but positioned Margaret's old Bible to block its view, then called James using a prepaid phone he'd provided. "She's accelerating," I told him. "The neurologist appointment was moved up." "So are we," James replied. "The trust paperwork is complete. Patterson agreed to be your independent psychiatric evaluator. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., my office. As for the evidence of medication tampering, the lab confirmed those aren't your prescribed drugs." I clutched the phone tighter. "And Robert? What about my son?" James's hesitation spoke volumes. "The investigator's report shows he's deeper in debt than we thought. 3 maxed credit cards in his name, but with Caroline as the primary user. He may be as much victim as accomplice." Hope flickered, a dangerous emotion when everything was at stake, but necessary. Without hope for Robert, this was merely revenge, not redemption. The next morning, I feigned a bathroom fall. Nothing serious, just enough to convince Caroline I needed to rest instead of seeing Dr. Garrett. As anticipated, she rescheduled rather than cancelling, buying me the afternoon I needed to slip away to James's office. Dr. Patterson, a geriatric psychiatrist with 40 years' experience, spent 2 hours evaluating me through standardized tests and conversation. Unlike Caroline's hand-picked doctor, his assessment was thorough and impartial. "Mr. Harrison," he concluded, "you show no clinical signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. Your recall, executive functioning, and problem-solving abilities are not merely intact, they're exceptional for any age." James documented his findings for our legal countermeasure, then outlined the next phase. "Tomorrow, I'll file for an emergency injunction against the guardianship petition. The evidence of financial exploitation and medication tampering should be enough for a temporary restraining order against Caroline." "And Robert?" I asked. James hesitated. "That's your call, Thomas. Including him in the restraining order would protect your assets but burn the bridge permanently." I stared out at the city skyline I'd helped shape with my construction company. Buildings remained long after their creators were gone. What legacy would I leave if I destroyed my only son to save myself? "Give me one more chance to reach him," I said finally. That evening, Caroline was in rare form, chattering about finding a memory care facility with dignity while serving Margaret's pot roast recipe, still with the wrong herbs. Robert sat silently, pushing food around his plate, a man drowning in slow motion. "I visited Margaret's grave today," I said suddenly, startling them both. Caroline recovered first. "Thomas, you haven't left the house. You've been here all day." "Have I?" I asked mildly. I could have sworn I put flowers on her stone, white lilies, her favorite. "See what I mean?" Caroline whispered loudly to Robert. "These confabulations are exactly what Dr. Garrett warned us about." Robert studied his plate. Dad's allowed to remember Mom however he wants. Caroline's fork clattered against china. It's not remembering if it didn't happen. It's concerning behavior that she liked lilies because they were in her mother's garden. I interrupted, my voice strengthening. Robert, do you remember helping her plant them along the east wall? You were 12. You complained the whole time about missing baseball practice. Something flickered in my son's eyes. Recognition, memory, perhaps guilt. You dug all the holes while she followed behind, placing each bulb carefully. She said you had the best technique she'd ever seen. Robert's breath caught. She said I had my father's hands, builder's hands. Caroline's face hardened. This reminiscing is lovely, but she was right, I said, ignoring her completely, holding my son's gaze. You always had my hands, but you had her heart. That's what I've been wondering, Robert. What happened to your mother's heart? The question hung in the room, charged and dangerous. For one breathtaking moment, I saw conflict war across my son's face, doubt, suspicion, and beneath it all, a glimmer of the man I'd raised. Then his phone buzzed. Caroline's number displayed on screen, though she sat across from him. Their signal. He stood abruptly. I need to make some calls about your appointment tomorrow, he muttered, retreating to his office. Left alone with Caroline, I watched her mask of concern slip, revealing cold calculation beneath. She began gathering dishes, humming softly, the sound of someone who believed victory was merely a formality. The kitchen fell silent after Robert left. Only the clink of Caroline's rings against china plates as she cleared the table. I remained seated, watching her efficient movements, the same precision she'd applied to dismantling my life. You know, I said quietly, Margaret always served dessert in her grandmother's blue dishes. Caroline stiffened. Those old things? I packed them away months ago, too fragile for everyday use. Packed them or had them appraised? I asked, allowing a flicker of lucidity to show. Her smile tightened. You should rest, Thomas. Tomorrow's a big day with Dr. Garrett. I nodded docilely, retreating to my study, where I knew her hidden camera would capture my movements. For its benefit, I shuffled papers aimlessly before tucking the letter for Robert into Margaret's first edition Hemingway, a book my son had given her, one I knew he'd notice. At 8:30 the next morning, as Caroline ushered me toward her SUV for the appointment, her cell phone rang. The courthouse calling about James Levinson's emergency filing and the temporary restraining order against her. There must be some mistake, she hissed, knuckles whitening. Who filed this? On what grounds? When the call ended, her composure shattered. What have you done? I straightened, shedding the stoop I'd affected for weeks. Should we discuss the medications you've been substituting, Caroline? Or the withdrawals from my accounts? Perhaps the real estate listings you've been collecting? Robert entered, his face ashen. Caroline, why is there a process server at the door with papers for both of us? Don't accept anything, she snapped. Your father is clearly confused. I've documented everything, including the camera in my study, I asked. Or the sleeping pills you replaced my heart medication with. The lab results were quite definitive. Robert looked between us, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. What is he talking about? Caroline pivoted remarkably. This proves exactly what I've been saying, she insisted, voice trembling with manufactured emotion. These paranoid delusions, these accusations, classic signs of dementia. Dr. Garrett warned us. The same Dr. Garrett who received $5,000 from my checking account? I interrupted. The payment you authorized using my forged signature? Robert's face went blank with shock. You said that was for specialized care assessment. I turned to my son, holding his gaze steadily. There's a letter for you in your mother's Hemingway, the one you gave her for your 30th birthday. Read it before you decide who's telling the truth. Caroline laughed, a brittle sound. More manipulation. Robert, we need to call our lawyer immediately. By someone taking advantage, I repeated softly. Yes, that's precisely what's happened here. For the first time in months, I saw genuine uncertainty in Robert's eyes. The seed of doubt had cracked open. He crossed to the bookshelf, finding the volume immediately. The envelope fell into his hand as he opened the book. Caroline lunged for it, but he stepped away, breaking the orbit she'd trapped him in. "I need a few minutes," he muttered, disappearing upstairs with the letter. Left alone with Caroline, I watched fury replace calculation. "You've been playing us," she hissed. "I learned from the best," I replied calmly, "though I must thank you for underestimating me so thoroughly." "Whatever you think you've accomplished, it won't work," she snapped. "Robert trusts me." "Perhaps not," I conceded. "But this might." I slid my phone across the table, playing the recording of her conversation with the estate liquidator, discussing how quickly they could sell my belongings after the guardianship was approved. Her own voice filled the room, clinically dissecting my life into sellable assets. Footsteps on the stairs silenced us both. Robert appeared, his face transformed, grief, anger, and clarity warring for dominance. "Is it true?" he asked Caroline, voice barely audible. "About the medications?" She reached for him. "Robert, you know your father needs help." "I saw the pills," he interrupted. "I found them where Dad said they'd be. I compared them with his prescriptions." He turned to me, the son I knew finally emerging from beneath layers of manipulation. "Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the medications or the forged checks." His voice broke. I nodded once, hope blooming painful and bright. "I believe you." Caroline's desperation filled the room. "Robert, think about our situation. The debts, the business." "Get out," he whispered. "Now." As she gathered her purse, defeat showed in her posture. At the door, she attempted one final manipulation. "Without me, who will care for him when he deteriorates?" Robert straightened his shoulders. "My stance," Margaret had always said. "I will. His actual son, not someone who saw him as a bank account." When the door closed behind her, the silence between us was heavy with everything unsaid. Recovery wouldn't be simple. Trust, once fractured, mended slowly. "I've made terrible mistakes," Robert finally said. "I regarded my son, the only legacy that mattered." "Yes," I agreed. "Now we fix them, together." James arrived an hour later with legal documents requiring immediate attention. The restraining order needed reinforcement, the guardianship petition needed formal dismissal, and most urgently, my will needed updating. "I've prepared several options," James explained, spreading papers across the dining table where Caroline had so recently plotted my financial demise. Robert stood to leave, but I caught his arm. "Stay. This concerns you too." As James outlined asset protections and trust structures, I watched my son's face. The shame there was a necessary pain, cauterizing a wound before healing could begin. "And finally," James concluded, "your decision regarding Caroline's explicit exclusion from the will needs to be formalized." I signed without hesitation, the pen pressing firmly against paper. Not from vindictiveness, but from clarity. The medications had cleared my system, and with them, any doubt about what needed to be done. 3 weeks after Caroline's departure, Robert had moved back into his old room. Temporarily, he insisted. Each morning, we shared coffee in companionable silence, rebuilding what had been broken between us. James handled the legal aftermath with efficient precision. The evidence against Caroline proved irrefutable: forged signatures, unauthorized withdrawals, tampered medications confirmed by laboratory analysis. I declined to press criminal charges despite Robert's protests. "You're being too generous," he said, as we reviewed the finalized documents. "After what she did." "Justice and vengeance are different destinations," I replied. "Your mother taught me that." Robert flinched at Margaret's mention, but held my gaze, a small victory in our healing process. The revised will now lay before me. Its provisions were straightforward. My estate would transfer to a trust benefiting Robert, with protections against external claims. A separate educational trust for my grandchildren, substantial donations to elder justice organizations. Caroline's name appeared nowhere in the document, neither as beneficiary nor as specific exclusion. Some bridges, once burned, should remain ashes. "I wish Mum could see this," Robert said quietly. "She always said you were the wisest man she knew." "She sees," I assured him, "and she'd be prouder of you now than ever before." "For betraying you? For finding your way back?" I interrupted. "That takes more courage than never straying." As we signed the documents, Margaret's presence felt palpable, not as grief's hollow echo, but as the warm certainty that what was broken could be mended. The following Sunday, we hosted a small dinner party. My first social gathering since Margaret's passing. James and his wife, my old friend Harold from the construction company, Robert's childhood friend Michael, who'd become the town's mayor. The house filled with voices and laughter that had been absent too long. During dessert, served on Margaret's blue dishes that Robert had carefully unpacked, Harold raised his glass. "To Thomas, who taught us that integrity isn't just about building sturdy walls, but knowing when to tear down the ones that imprison us." "Speaking of integrity," James added, "the Elder Justice Bill your donation helped fund passed committee yesterday. It strengthens penalties for financial exploitation." Robert's eyes met mine across the table. From personal tragedy, broader protection. From private pain, public good. Later, as guests departed, Robert lingered in my study doorway. "I found my old blueprints in the attic," he said. "Designs from before Caroline convinced me to chase bigger projects." "The retirement community designs," I recalled. "Practical, dignified spaces." He nodded. "I've been thinking about restarting smaller. Building something that would have protected someone like you, not exploited them." "Harrison and Son Construction," I said. "It has a good foundation." His smile, Margaret's smile, lit his face. "We'll need office space. Your mother's sewing room would make an excellent drafting area. She'd approve of its new purpose." That night, I spoke aloud to Margaret, as had become my custom. "We made it through, my love. Not unscathed, but unbroken." I touched her wedding ring on the chain around my neck. "Our boy found his way home. The medication tampering had left some lingering effects, occasional dizziness, memory gaps. Yet I felt more clear-headed than I had in years. Crisis had burned away pretense, leaving only what was essential. Caroline would soon receive the divorce papers Robert had filed. She would receive nothing from my estate. But her greatest loss was invisible on any balance sheet. The trust she had destroyed, the family she had rejected, the legacy of character she had never valued. As for me, I had reclaimed my voice, my agency, my son. I had learned that true wealth isn't measured in accounts or assets, but in the courage to stand for truth, even when standing alone. That true legacy isn't what's written in a will, but what's written in the hearts of those we leave behind. And most importantly, I had discovered that even in our twilight years, we are not finished becoming, that sometimes our greatest strength emerges exactly when others mistake us for weak. Caroline had tried to take my money by declaring me crazy. Instead, she had helped me find a clarity I'd forgotten I possessed. If this story touched you, I would be grateful if you'd like this video, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications. The greatest protection against exploitation is awareness, something we can build together, one story at a time.